Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7 for this Tuesday, the 5th of November. I'm Douglas MacKenzie, bringing you stories from Scotland and around the world. We don't have a guest with us tonight. I suspect our regulars may all be out, marking Guy Fawkes's attempts to radically reform the Westminster Parliament. However, I hope the stories we have, some of which you won't find elsewhere in the Scottish media, will provoke discussion wherever you are. Remember, if you want to comment on any of the stories or indeed anything to do with Broadcasting Scotland, we maintain an X account, Twitter account, and also one on Blue Sky where your comments are welcome. We begin tonight, as we always do, with the latest from Ukraine on day 986 since the full-scale Russian invasion of the country. Ukraine believes 11,000 North Korean troops have reached the Kursk border region in Russia, Volodymyr Zelensky said on Monday. That was echoed by the US as Pentagon spokesman Major General Pat Ryder said, "We think that the total number of DPRK, that's Democratic People's Republic of Korea, forces in Russia could be closer to around 11 to 12,000, with at least 10,000 right now in the Kursk Oblast." Zelensky criticised the West for its muted response about the North Koreans. "We see an increase in North Koreans and no increase in the reaction of our partners, unfortunately," the Ukrainian president said in his evening address on Monday. Andriy Yermak, Zelensky's chief of staff, said that, like the Russian army, the North Koreans pose a threat to Ukraine. They are present there, and of course, they will die. Andriy Sybiga, Zelensky's foreign minister, said, "We call on Europe to realise that North Korean troops are now waging an aggressive war in Europe against a sovereign European state. This proves once again that while the West is afraid and hesitates, Russia is acting and going for escalation." Germany's foreign minister Annalena Baerbock visited Ukraine on Monday, offering rock-solid support in what amounted to a symbolic display. Germany is Ukraine's second largest backer after the US, but its Chancellor Olaf Scholz is refusing to provide long-range Taurus missiles and has rejected Ukraine's request to immediately be invited into NATO. Baerbock's arrival was announced a few hours after 13 people, including 4 police officers, were wounded in another night of Russian attacks on Ukraine's second largest city, Kharkiv. Ukraine said it had downed 50 Iranian-designed Russian drones in 9 regions, including over the capital Kyiv, overnight into Monday. Zelensky later said Russia had been using around 10 times more drones compared with the same period last year. A woman from the eastern Ukrainian city of Slovyansk was given 15 years jail on high treason charges for aiding invading Russian forces, Ukrainian prosecutors said on Monday. Between March and April this year, she passed information about Ukrainian troop deployments to the Russian army, including where Ukrainian forces were stationed and the placement of checkpoints. Ukraine has opened thousands of cases of potential aiding and abetting Russia since the February 2022 invasion. An incendiary device hidden in a DHL package that caught fire in Germany in July was due to be sent by air to the UK as part of a suspected Russian sabotage plot that may also have been a dry run for a similar attack on the US and Canada. UK and European law enforcement officials say they suspect Russia was behind this and other attacks as part of an effort to cause, quote, mayhem in the West in retaliation for Western military support to Ukraine. Moving now to the Middle East, and at least 43,391 Palestinians have been killed and 102,347 wounded in Gaza since October 7th, 2023, according to a statement from the Gaza Health Authority. During the same period, the death toll in Lebanon has reached 3,013 and 13,553 injured, according to the Lebanese Health Ministry. And a story which broke just before we came on air, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has fired Defence Minister Yoav Gallant, the Prime Minister's office said. Israel Katz, currently the foreign minister, will become defence minister, and Gideon Sa'ar will replace Katz as foreign minister. That's all the detail we have on that story at the moment. At least 30 people have been reported killed, including children, after tents housing displaced civilians were struck in Israeli airstrikes on Gaza today. More than 100 patients, including children suffering from trauma injuries and chronic diseases, are due to be evacuated from Gaza on Wednesday, per the World Health Organization. It said 12,000 people were awaiting transfer on medical grounds. Israeli planes have dropped leaflets over Bethlehem in the far north of Gaza, ordering residents who have not yet left their homes and shelters housing displaced families to leave the town. Al Jazeera, citing Gaza's civil defense, reports that Israeli forces continue to disrupt humanitarian and medical services in northern Gaza for the 14th day in a row. Action for Humanity, a UK-based charity which is operating in Gaza, has published a report in which it has claimed that 24% of people it spoke to in Gaza have been displaced 10 times or more over the past year by Israeli military action. Israel's military reported that as of 3 p.m. local time, it had recorded approximately 40 projectiles crossing over into Israel from Lebanon today. It also issued an operational update on its ground incursions inside Lebanese territory, in which it claims to have located and destroyed an underground structure belonging to Hezbollah. Lebanon's Nation news agency reported the Israel army, quote, is booby-trapping and destroying entire neighborhoods in cities and towns, such that more than 37 towns have been wiped out and their homes destroyed, and more than 40,000 housing units have been completely destroyed. Israel has repeatedly claimed it is carrying out limited intelligence-led raids. Israel's army and the Shin Bet have announced that they have arrested what they described as over 60 members of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine in the Israeli-occupied West Bank and Lebanon. At least 4 Palestinians were killed by Israeli security forces during the course of their operations inside the West Bank today. Israeli authorities are reported to have demolished 3 homes in the Al-Bustan neighborhood of occupied East Jerusalem's Silwan area. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has reaffirmed that Iran has a right to respond to any violation of its security and territorial integrity in line with the principle of legitimate self-defense. The Times of Israel is reporting that an unnamed Israeli official has told it that nothing will happen on the ground in terms of a ceasefire or hostage deal until the result of the US election is known. A protest in Tel Aviv by relatives and friends of those still being held hostage in Gaza by Hamas blocked the southern Ayalon highway. In a statement, the protesters said, "A government that conducts psychological warfare against its own people while continuously forsaking them has no mandate to continue a war. Only signing a hostage deal and ending the war in Gaza will bring everyone home." Today is election day in America, with tens of millions of voters heading to the polls in one of the closest and most consequential contests in modern US history. The Democrat Kamala Harris and her Republican opponent Donald Trump appear locked in a knife-edge contest, with barely any difference between the pair in national opinion polls that have hardly moved in weeks. In the 7 crucial swing states, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Arizona, Nevada, Georgia, and North Carolina, the picture is the same. Recent polling has been unable to discern a clear pattern or advantage for either Harris or Trump in this electoral battleground, though most experts agree that whoever wins the Rust Belt state of Pennsylvania is likely to have a clear advantage. Harris spent all of Monday in Pennsylvania and finished in Philadelphia, where she was joined by the singer Lady Gaga and TV personality Oprah Winfrey, who warned of the threat that Trump poses to democracy. "We don't get to sit this one out," Winfrey said. "If we don't show up tomorrow, it's entirely possible that we will not have the opportunity to ever cast a ballot again." Trump told supporters that if he did not win, it was their fault for not getting the vote out. Under the American political system, the result is decided not by the national popular vote, but an electoral college in which each state's number of electors is weighed roughly by the size of its population. The candidates need 270 votes in the electoral college to win, and the battleground is formed of those states where polls indicate a state could go either way. More than 78 million early ballots have been cast. With polling so tight, full results in the crucial swing states are unlikely to be available on Tuesday night and may not even emerge on Wednesday, leaving the US and the world waiting to find out who will be America's next president. The election brings to an end a remarkable and in many ways unprecedented election campaign that has deeply divided American society and upped the stress levels of many of its citizens amid warnings of civil unrest, especially in a scenario where Harris wins and Trump contests the result. Harris has consistently centered her campaign on the autocratic threat that Trump represents. In her final big signature event, Harris staged a rally of 75,000 supporters on the Ellipse in Washington, the spot where Trump helped encourage his supporters to attack the Capitol on 6 January 2021. A few hours ahead of the opening of voting, US authorities warned of Russia-linked disinformation operations, which have falsely claimed officials in battleground states plan to fraudulently sway the outcome of the US presidential election. Russia is the most active threat, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, the FBI, and the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency said on Monday. The statement also noted that Iran remained a significant foreign influence threat to US elections. This latest ODNI statement cited the example of a recent video that falsely depicted an interview with a person claiming election fraud in Arizona involving fake overseas ballots and changing of voter rolls to favor Kamala Harris. The Arizona Secretary of State, Adrian Fontes, called the video and its claims completely fake, false, and fraudulent. In Scotland now, and Finance Secretary Shona Robertson has today called on the Treasury to urgently address the, quote, growing confusion and alarm caused by the planned increase to employer national insurance contributions. The Scottish Government estimates that the hit to the Scottish budget could be around £500 million. The Treasury have so far failed to provide clarity on how exactly any mitigation will work, leaving the frontline services in Scotland in the dark about the hit to their financial position from next April. Last week, BMA Scotland said the hike was potentially a substantial blow to Scotland's GPs. Meanwhile, the Scottish Council for Voluntary Organisations said that the budget, quote, fails to recognise the implications of these changes on the voluntary sector. Ms Robertson today urged the Treasury to provide badly needed clarity and reassurance for frontline service providers in Scotland. Commenting, Ms Robertson said, the UK government's employer national insurance hike could hamper services in Scotland to the tune of around £500 million. And the more we look at this announcement, the more concerned we are by it. With the Treasury failing to provide clarity about any mitigation process at the time of the budget's publication, services across Scotland are feeling growing confusion and alarm at the very time when they need to be able to plan ahead. Third sector organisations, GP practices, social care providers, and many more public services could be affected, and this will inevitably have knock-on consequences for the delivery of vital frontline services. These services are already under financial pressure following years of rising costs and pressures due to the UK's mismanagement of the economy, and the last thing they need is to be hit by this Labour jobs tax. The Treasury must fully mitigate the impact of this change on the public sector in Scotland. We need clarity on this as soon as possible as we prepare to publish our own budget on December the 4th. Ms Robertson added, the Chancellor's budget failed to restore the winter fuel payment and failed to remove the two-child cap on benefits, We now see a potentially devastating effect on frontline services in Scotland. The people of Scotland deserve better, and the Scottish Government will continue standing up for them and for a fairer Scotland. UK politics now, and Kemi Badenoch has appointed the former Policing Minister Chris Philp as Shadow Home Secretary and Alex Burkhardt as her de facto deputy, as the new Conservative leader set out her full shadow cabinet. Tom Tugendhat, the former Security Minister who ran for the leadership, declined a role in the shadow cabinet, although it has not been revealed what job he was offered. Andrew Bowie has been appointed as the Shadow Scotland Secretary. Badenoch said the shadow cabinet, quote, draws on the talents of people from across the Conservative Party, based on meritocracy and with a breadth of experience and perspective, just as I promised during the campaign. A number of senior Tories had ruled themselves out of the front bench roles. They included Jeremy Hunt, the former Chancellor and Shadow Chancellor, and James Cleverly, the Shadow Home Secretary, who was favoured to become the next leader until he was surprisingly removed in the final vote among Tory MPs. Steve Barclay, the former Health Secretary and Brexit Secretary, had also said he intended to return to the backbenches. The full lineup is Mel Stride, Shadow Chancellor, Priti Patel, Shadow Foreign Secretary, Chris Philp, Shadow Home Secretary, Alex Burkhardt, Shadow Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, Northern Ireland Secretary, James Cartledge, Shadow Defence Secretary, Robert Jenrick, Shadow Justice Secretary, Laura Trott, Shadow Education Secretary, Ed Arger, Shadow Health Secretary, Kevin Hollinrake, Shadow Housing and Community Secretary, Victoria Atkins, Shadow Environment Secretary, Andrew Griffith, Shadow Business Secretary, Claire Coutinho, Shadow Energy Secretary, Helen Whately, Shadow Work and Pensions, Gareth Bacon, Shadow Transport Secretary, Stuart Andrew, Shadow Culture Secretary, Alan Mack is the Shadow Science Secretary, Jesse Norman being Shadow Commons Leader. Andrew Bowie, as I've said, is the Shadow Scotland Secretary. Mims Davis has the same role in Wales. Rebecca Harris is Chief Whip. Nigel Huddleston, Tory Party Co-Chair, a role he shares with Dominic Johnson. Staying with the UK government, and at a meeting of the Treasury Select Committee in the House of Commons today, the head of the Office for Budget Responsibility, OBR, Richard Hughes, suggested that Treasury officials may have broken the law when they failed to alert the OBR about £9.5 billion of spending that should have appeared in the March budget. Mr Hughes said that laws governing how the Treasury gives information to the OBR could have been breached when civil servants kept spending commitments under wraps. Mr Hughes said he had not complained at the time of the last budget, because what you don't know, you don't know. But he said the disclosure would have materially changed a forecast predicting the impact on the economy of Jeremy Hunt's pre-election budget. Treasury Committee Chair Meg Hillier said it would need to investigate the legal situation to establish whether any laws had been broken. Laws applying to the relationship between the Treasury and the OBR were put in place when the OBR was created by the then Chancellor, George Osborne, in 2010. Hughes, who was responding to questions about Labour's first budget in 14 years, said the OBR was changing the way it interacted with the Treasury when drawing up its economic and fiscal forecasts. We are moving from a system of trust to a system of trust but verify, he said. He added it will involve greater scrutiny on our part of departmental spending limits and the preparations of departments' budgets to make sure that those kind of pressures do get disclosed to us and we have a conversation about how they will be managed and offset and what it means for departmental overspending or underspending. Hughes said how the OBR had built up a way of working with the Treasury over the years, which was a so-called high trust relationship, that expenditure pressures on departments were being well managed and managed within the spending total allocated to departments. He said that system very clearly broke down. Hughes said the OBR was not aware of the extra pressures on government departments when the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, told MPs in July there was a £22 billion black hole in the public finances. Asked how the OBR was blindsided, Hughes said, The Treasury has a large number of public servants managing departmental budgets. We have a handful of people who have to focus their scrutiny and challenge on what they think biggest risks are. Hughes said the OBR asked the Treasury what information was held by civil servants and ministers when the independent forecaster compiled its March predictions. This request uncovered £9.5 billion of net spending pressure, which they did not declare to us, which under the law and under the Act they should have, Hughes said. Ireland now, and Taoiseach Simon Harris has said he plans to call a general election this week, paving the way for a polling date likely to be at the end of November. Mr Harris is expected to dissolve the Dáil either on Thursday before a meeting of European leaders in Budapest or on Friday when he returns. Under the rules, a minimum of 18 days' notice is required for an election, which can lead to short and frenetic campaigns. A November or early December election has been firmly on the cards since the Taoiseach announced 2 weeks ago he would call an election for this year rather than waiting until next February, 1 month before the government's 5-year term ends. A €10.5 billion budget giveaway in early October was also seen as putting the country on an election footing. I do intend to seek a dissolution of the Dáil this week. I don't think that will come as a shock to any person right across this country, Harris told reporters today. Harris said he would call an election once a finance bill putting the budget's tax and spend changes into law had been passed. The bill is expected to be voted through by the Dáil today and by the Seanad on Wednesday. We need to get through the business of the next few days first, he added. Harris leads a coalition government made up of his own party, the Conservative Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil and the Green Party. Fine Gael has enjoyed a sizable boost in its rankings since Harris, 37, took over in April from his predecessor, Leo Varadkar. An opinion poll on Sunday put Fine Gael on 26%, Fianna Fáil on 20%, and the main opposition party, Sinn Féin, trailing on 18%. The Scottish Parliament now, and at Holyrood today, the Scottish Parliament has passed legislation that will see Scotland move to using 5-year carbon budgets to set climate targets. The Climate Change Emissions Reduction Targets Scotland Bill amends the Climate Change Scotland Act 2009 to introduce limits on the amount of greenhouse gases emitted in Scotland over a 5-year period. The move, which is based on recommendations from the Independent Climate Change Committee, and aims to provide a more reliable framework for emissions reduction. This is because the previous annual emissions targets are vulnerable to year-to-year fluctuations caused by events such as a particularly cold winter or a global pandemic. The legislation enables the carbon budgets to be set through secondary legislation based on the expert advice from the Climate Change Committee. The bill also changes the current deadline to finalise the next climate change plan for Scotland, so the plan can align with the process for setting the new carbon budgets. Acting Cabinet Secretary for Net Zero, Julian Martin said, Scotland is now halfway to net zero and continues to be ahead of the UK as a whole in delivering long-term emissions reductions. The Scottish Government's commitment to ending Scotland's contribution to global emissions by 2045 at the latest, as agreed by Parliament on a cross-party basis, is unwavering. It is crucial that our target pathway to 2045 is set at a pace and scale that is feasible and reflects the latest independent expert advice. Carbon budgets are an established model for assessment of emissions reductions used by other nations including Japan, France, England and Wales, and they will include emissions from international aviation and shipping, and there will be no provision to carry over emissions from one carbon budget to another. We will continue leading on climate action that is fair, ambitious and capable of rising to the emergency before us, and which reflects our commitment to the ambition of credible emissions reduction. Commenting MSP, Bob Doris said, tackling the climate emergency is one of the SNP government's 4 key priorities, and this bill is an essential part in achieving that. By creating a carbon budget for Scotland, it will underpin our emissions targets and clear the path to net zero by 2045. Staying in Scotland, and NHS consultants across the country have voted to accept a £124.9 million investment in their pay and reward package, ensuring their pay is competitive with other UK nations. The pay deal will see a 10.5% uplift to all basic pay, with £5.7 million invested in other contractual elements. It will be backdated to the 1st of April 2024. A total of £124.9 million has been committed for consultants' pay in 2024 to 25. This will be distributed as a 10.5% pay uplift for all consultants, with £5.7 million allocated towards uplifting discretionary points from 3,204 to 3,600 per point. Discretionary points are financial awards given in Scotland, with each NHS board required to make these available to reward excellence in service delivery to consultants who have reached pay point 5 of the pay scale or its equivalent, associate specialists who have reached pay point 7 and remain on the old contract. Health Secretary Neil Gray said, "I'm very pleased that the consultants have voted to accept our pay offer. This will ensure that our consultant workforce feels valued, supported and fairly rewarded. This will bring Scotland back into line with recent pay deals in other parts of the UK, ensuring our NHS remains competitive when recruiting and retaining consultants. I wish to thank our consultants for their dedication and patience. They are a critical part of NHS Scotland's workforce, and we are committed to supporting them." The Scottish Government has launched a new plan to attract responsible private investment into natural capital markets in Scotland. Minister for Employment and Investment, Tom Arthur, launched Scotland's Natural Capital Market Framework as he spoke of the Nature Finance UK 2024 conference. The framework provides guidance for investors, land managers and communities on attracting responsible private investment into peatlands, woodlands and nature restoration. Its focus is on maintaining the high standards that have been set by the Woodland Carbon Code and Peatland Code. It supports Scotland's national strategy for economic transformation and will contribute to two of the government's key priorities: driving sustainable economic growth and tackling the climate and nature crises. Research published this week also shows that Scotland's natural assets contribute more than £40 billion to the economy and support around 260,000 jobs. Mr. Arthur said, "This framework outlines the steps we will take to attract greater responsible private investment into high-integrity natural capital projects. Scotland's breathtaking landscapes, rich biodiversity and abundant natural resources are much more than a source of pride. They are the foundations of our future prosperity, with investment being key to economic growth. Our peatlands, forests, rivers and coastlines are valued at £230 billion, providing essential services like clean air, fresh water, carbon sequestration and resilience to the impact of climate change. We have committed to restoring 250,000 hectares of degraded peatlands, halting biodiversity loss and establishing tens of thousands of hectares of new woodland in the next 5 years, generating good green jobs and skills training, mostly in rural communities. We take this responsibility seriously, but it is abundantly clear that to meet our targets for cutting emissions, we need private investors to share the load. This framework gives us a guide to attracting responsible investment partners to join our work in restoring and enhancing our natural assets and the opportunities for our communities and our economy." Staying with the Scottish Government, and today the Chief Statistician has released statistics on the reliefs and exemptions from non-domestic rates that were in place on the 1st of June 2024. These figures were produced by independent statistical staff, free from any political influence, in accordance with professional standards set out in the Code of Practice for Statistics. On the 1st of June 2024, 153,950 properties were in receipt of relief from non-domestic rates. This accounts for 61% of non-domestic properties on the valuation roll. The total value of all reliefs was £727 million. There were 121,790 properties, or 48% of those on the valuation roll, receiving an exemption from rates or a 100% relief and paying no rates. The total value of reliefs awarded to these properties was almost £520 million. Small Business Bonus Scheme (SBBS) relief was awarded to 112,720 properties, accounting for a value of £239 million. 100% SBBS relief was awarded to more than 96,000 properties with a value of £208 million. A further 1,060 properties had SBBS relief combined with another relief summing to 100%. Over 19,000 properties received general revaluation transitional relief, protecting them from large increases in gross non-domestic rates bills as a result of the 2023 revaluation. There were 6,800 properties receiving small business transitional relief with a total value of £20 million. Responding to the 2023-24 non-domestic relief statistics for rates, Public Finance Minister Ivan McKenzie said, "These non-domestic rates relief figures clearly show the Scottish Government supporting businesses across the country, with properties across Scotland benefiting from £727 million in relief." Our Small Business Bonus Scheme remains the most generous of its kind in the UK and benefits over 110,000 properties in Scotland to a value of £239 million. We will continue to do all we can to support businesses and work with them to make most of Scotland's economic opportunities, in turn generating wealth to invest in our public services. Well, a rather densely packed news tonight. Before I go, I just want to remind you that at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. To everyone who has donated, and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, thank you very much. We face costs of over £4,000 every month, but only receive donations of around 2,500. We urgently need more regular subscribers, but we need to clear our debts as well. We are at crisis point and really need to increase our donations to be able to pay bills and survive. Our programmes will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. And please donate whatever you can afford. Thank you very much for watching tonight or on catch up. And if you're going out to a bonfire, enjoy yourselves and be safe. Please join us again on Broadcasting Scotland tomorrow, when the world may be a different place after the US election. Good night and thank you for watching.